Hello, I am coming to you to try to talk about a rag quilt that I'm trying to make. I have had a great time trying to figure out how to make these pieces work and with the materials that I have. So it's been a bit of a challenge. So I was trying to design a rag quilt that had kind of a scrappy look to it instead of just the squares with the X's that are pretty traditional. And I had a line of fabric from a designer called Me and My Sister, but I only had what are called a scrap bag. And scrap bags are like the excess cut off the sides from when they're making pre-cuts. So they're kind of a fun little brown bag. You get a roll of material, but it is not as crisp and clear as I thought I had one, as a basic jelly roll that everything is uniformly the same size. It's a little bit of a mishmash, which makes it a challenge slash interesting. So here's an example of a piece that was from Me and My Sister's Rainy Day. It has a fun little umbrella thing going on. But this is a great example of a piece where there's not a ton of material in this strip. Let me throw a ruler on this. It looks like less than 2 inches of actual pattern. And then it's also not 44 inches long. It is, I think if I remember correctly, around 30 inches. Put a ruler against it. Yeah, it seems about right. It's about 30 inches. So here's an example of a piece from there. But then there was also this one that had the color side of the selvage, and it's much wider. And then you have another colored piece with the selvage with the little tiny dots in it. See if that works. Okay. And then this one is skinnier than the others. So I had a bunch of different colors, and I played with them because I'm trying to actually make 2 quilts. I'm trying to make one in the blue and green colorway and one in the pink, purple, orange colorway for 2 different girls that are sisters. So I was trying to kind of go cohesive, but also individual as well. So I pulled out of these the ones that had a white background because they weren't going to work for what I was trying to do. And then there were also a few that had a black background. But I can show you on these. I did trim these, so I'll show you some differences here. So in this particular set of colors, this black piece had has the pinked edge, and then I trimmed it to a size that would work for making strips. Excuse me. So this one came out to about, if I had to guess, 2.5 inches. So then I pulled out some other strips to see what I could get out of that chunk of colors. So I got one that was about 2 inches, and then I ended up with one that was about 1.5. What this does is this gives us a bunch of scrappy widths to work with. So I didn't end up using the black or the white ones, so I used the colors. And then I needed a little bit more fabric to fill out those colorways because the colors weren't even. Like the pile of blues and greens was not as equal as the warmer colors. So I did go and get some yardage from a different line of that same designer. So this is also Me and My Sister, but was not in the first set. But this one I believe was. But I did find it as yardage as well. So I got some of the orange, and I cut some 2s, some 2.5s in the different sizes with these. And then I'll show you how I put those together. So I ended up making kind of like a giant jelly roll quilt style, in that it was strips plus strips plus strips. And to make it scrappy, to make like a piece of fabric that was a cohesive chunk of all the strips. So I'll show you an example, and then I'll show you how I did it. So here is an example of the purples and pinks. And if I was to unfold it, I've already trimmed some off of this so that it isn't the full size, but this is what I was working with, was just a giant piece of fabric made up of several smaller and variety of stripes, randomized. I did end up ironing these seams open. That was the best plan, was to iron them open so that they were easier to nest, easier to combine with each other. Okay, so to get this pattern, with all of these skinny strips, I was having some trouble getting them connected and it not pull and mess up my strips. So I did the similar to the jelly roll race method, which was you sew two together and then you sew those two together and then you sew those two together. And I was having a little bit of trouble once you get it at the machine, like once I turned away from my table and I sat down at my machine, trying to remember which strip was which is on the left, which is on the right, things like that. So I did a fun little trick here. I took pieces of the selvage and I laid them out on my table, and I made myself a key of which piece goes with which piece, so that when I put the whole bit of fabric together, I still knew what the final piece was supposed to look like. So I did, that way I was able to strip the pieces, chain strip them, and put two together, two together, two together, two together, two together, and then when I cut them apart, I was able to figure out, oh, this purple swirly one needs to connect to the pink stripe one, and the pink stripe one needs to connect to the little orange one, so that I could put them together. And they stay consistently variegated, variety, random, whatever you want to call it. So this was from, this section right here was from most of the original fabrics from the original set that I had. And then I decided I wanted more, because you never have enough fabric, right? So then I got an additional scrap bag from this same designer, and it had some different colors of prints. So they don't look hugely different, but they are kind of a lighter color set and a little fresher. So I thought those were pretty good. Those were some of my original sets. And the design I was working off of was a block that had like string quilting, X's and O's type design. So it has the strings and the skinny pieces, and then when you place them together, they make X's and O's. So here was one of my testers where I was trying to decide on my scrapped section that I cut to make a block that had these scrappy bits on a color stripe. How wide did I need to make those to make a space here? I did have at the time, and I still do, but I don't think I'm going to use them, have these 10-inch paper piecing quilting squares. I can see their value and their use, but I don't know they're going to work for this, for my final product. But it was worth trying, and it gives me a solid base to experiment on. But I tried different widths. So this strip right here is 1.5 inches. This is 1.5 inches. This is oh, what's it called? It's not a jelly roll. It's a honey bun. It's the skinnier strips than the on the plain color fabric. Instead of it being a 2.5 inch wide, it's like a honey bun, I think is what Moda calls them. Is about 1.5 inches. So I tried it with 1.5 inches in the middle, and this was 2.5, and this was 2.5, and I was playing with, like, did it reach all the way to the edge? So the right spacing and cutting originally will help me with that. So I was playing with the different distances and spacing. So then I put together another tester of making the rag quilt, and this one I did with the 2.5 inch solid down the middle, a 2.5 inch of the color strip, a 1.5 inch of the color strip with the 1.5 solid colors next to them, and then this one was also a 2.5. So these two are 2.5, and there's one color that's 1.5 inches. And I mounted this like it was a scrap quilt. It had the fashion fabric or the color fabric. It has one piece of flannel, and then one piece of a sheet that was as a temporary backer for me to play around with. While I was doing this, I was noticing that if I had just cut, if I was just cutting these pieces out, I was getting a lot of waste on the edges. So then I was like, well, what if I start piecing and then add the strip to my strips? Which that doesn't make sense. Sorry about that. Okay, so my strip set are the colors, and I needed to add a white to that. So what if I just sewed the white to these? Because if you're trying to sew together basically 2.5-inch squares in a line and get something solid to it, it gets a little wonky pretty quick. So leaving it solid was a lot easier. So I left it pretty rock solid, and then I would put the white strip on it, and then I would cut it. And then I would cut that 2.5-inch measurement from the edge. So that would create, let me show you, this section right here. So it's the 2.5 plus the 1.5. So then I had those built, and I was like, well, I think I can come up with some other shortcuts here. So I would do this strip with another honey bun version on it and cut those out. But what I was noticing is as I cut those out, let me see if I can find one right here. If I built it as a triangle here with the 2.5-inch on this side, with the 1.5-inch white, the 1.5-inch color, the 1.5-inch, and then the 2.5, I gave myself a triangle, which conveniently, when you put together triangles, you get a strip, right? So this gives me a way to create efficiencies in the cutting. Instead of just building these triangular blocks, I was able to build a long strip set and use a square ruler to lay on there and just cut out, flip it over, cut it out, flip it over, cut it out, flip it over, cut it out, which worked really well until it got to the end of each of these strip sets, which were, since I was using this white one as a pre-cut, about 44 inches. So I was getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like five or so out of it. And then the ends were waste. Like I'd have to recycle, pick them apart, put them back together to make a new square. So then I decided, well, what would happen if I made super long strips? Super long strips. So then I started piecing together the white, joining together the white in between strips. So then I had a super long strip set that I could cut out tons and tons of these. So I was able to do that, and that was much more efficient. So then whatever waste was left, I could recycle and make into a new scrap set for my production purposes. So I did play around a little bit with, let me get this out of the way, with the rag concept on how I wanted this to look. So this was another one of my testers with colors I wasn't planning on using. So it was playing around with the stripes and how the stripes would meet with each other. So then I played around with, okay, so if the fuzzy in the rag side is on the front where the design is, it kind of disrupts the way that those lines meet. It's not as clean as just the lines meeting. Obviously this is different widths, so these lines are not meant to match up quite yet. The final product will. So then I was looking at the back and I was realizing it looked really cool to see all these colors come through. So I thought that would be really neat. So I am going to run this one through the washing machine to see how it rags out a little bit. So this particular set, let me look at the materials here, appears to be the color set, the one piece of flannel, and then the back is sheeting. And then this piece I have put the edge seams on it so I can test how deep of a cut, how deep of a seam allowance do I need to make for these cuts. I think I did 1 inch, 3/4, 1/2, and 1/4. 1/4 is obviously too small for joining and ragging, but I was just playing around with that. So we'll see how that goes. So then I started trying to figure out how to get this onto a block with the least amount of duplication and seams. So what I ended up doing was I laid this white piece down the middle, and then I took my triangle sets and sewed them onto the white piece laying in the middle. And then when this flops over, that is already done, and this is already done. So then I was just tacking down this one corner here to get it to stay. So on the back, I should have contrasting fabric, but this, or contrasting thread. This one on the back only has the 2 seams around this center piece, which is to mount the triangles. And then I had tacked on these 2 corners just to hold them down to play with those. So that's the purple, pinks and purple colorway. Here's one without any backing fabric at all, just by itself. So pushing the, ironing the whites to the dark side because they really showed through that white, and then all of the other pieces were ironed open. This is 2 triangle color sets on 1 middle strip with no backing. Bunch more of my triangles. Oh, here's an example of one that was the end of a strip set that I cut where I was missing part of my triangle, so I couldn't complete it. But I can take these 2 spares from the end, and then I can piece them together and make myself a complete triangle. So I'm not wasting any of the parts here, mostly because this stuff is no longer being made. That particular fabric is no longer being made. So I have a couple of the blue ones here. I have a blue strip set from the other color way. This one's nice. It's got a good variety of colors. So I think if I cut this at, I think it was 6 inches. Put my ruler down somewhere. 6.5 inches. I could get a 2.5, a 2.5, and a 1.5 out of 1 strip set. So when I had that big piece of fabric, I would cut this down to 6.5 inches, and then I would put a white strip, cut those out, and then I'd be left with the little 1.5-inch strip in the middle, and that completes a whole triangle. It did get a little tricky with that, trying to build those triangles and keep them scrappy, because if I was cutting it all out of this single piece, by the time you turn them, then you're going to end up with the same patterns repeating. So it helped to have more than 1 strip set going at the same time so that you could mix them up and keep the variety going. So I had lots of pretty blue ones. So here's a couple of the blue sets. And this is a good example of the colors repeating. So I would, when I put together this block, I would not put these 2 next to each other because they have the same fabrics in the center. So I'll have to make sure that I'm getting 2 different triangle sets. Okay, using the middle strip is this 2.5-inch white. Can't remember if I did RJ or Moda, but using the same brand for the white in the middle every time was definitely helpful. I did use the papers to kind of organize because I needed a count of how many triangles I had made so that I would know how many blocks I had, because I'm trying to make somewhere between a twin and a couch size. So I kind of wrapped the two triangles in the papers in order to just keep them organized and have a count and make a pile. So I was using this sheet material that I got at Sam's. They were Egyptian cotton, 100% cotton. I ended up getting a king-sized gray and a king-sized white, and I think they were like $25 for a king-size fitted and not fitted or top sheet on both of these. So this was a lot of material for a small amount of money. So then I've been using these as one of the layers in the to build with the rag quilt. And then I needed a fuzzy layer. So for the blues, I picked out a baby blue flannel for the fuzzy layer. And then for the pinks and purples, I picked out a white. And let's see here. Here is an example of a blue set that I was laying out to put together. That I do not have all the parts for, but here are the triangles and then the backgrounds. And then I wanted to have a little bit of a darker color on all the way on the back, the actual back. So I found this kind of a grunge type gray. This is a quilting cotton. I don't recall which brand, but this is just a basic quilting cotton that is a good neutral for the back, which I thought would really show when the rag comes through on the back. It would look really fun. So I had one, let's see what I've got here. Had one laid out where this would be the front and then this would be the back in the blue. And then I put one together, testing out the order of operations here. And so this is one put all the way together. I did use, I still had white in my, white thread in my bobbin. So it shows up very loud on the back of the square, the two lines it takes to assemble this block on the final rag quilt. I did switch to a darker gray. So this is less prominent on with the darker gray. And this looks really nice because it's only a couple lines of sewing to make this sandwich. So this center piece just lays on the fabric, on the stack of fabric. So I've got the sheeting fabric for a layer, I have flannel, and then I have the background. So it's just a few layers, but they're pretty thin other than the flannel. So then I lay down this middle strip, and then I lay down this triangle set. And when I sew that line and I sew the other triangle set on, that secures it to my rag square. So it makes it pretty rock solid. Okay, so that's where I am putting all the pieces together. I have quite a few made. I think I have over 30 prepped triangles. So I have over 30 sets of prepped triangles ready to be made into blocks. So I'm ready to, next step is to work on assembling all of the blocks. I was working on getting the background fabrics cut apart and ready to go this weekend. So hopefully those will be ready to go and I'll be able to start making the blocks, and then I can start assembling them all together with each other, putting them all together, and then I can start cutting. And we'll see how that rag works out. But just wanted to give an update or a status or document where I am on this, and hopefully we'll have a finished quilt at some point soon. Thanks, bye.